Thank you very much. I'm a professor of literature and philosophy. And what I've tried to do is to understand in the encyclicals how His Holiness the Pope thinks about a new ethic against globalization. So mine is a more philosophical reading of what the new decolonizing ethics might be, because of course we now have another moment of decolonization. This is now decolonization within post-colonialism. It is not anti-colonial. So it's a much more complicated situation. I believe the Holy Father has been very illuminating in this respect, and I've tried to follow the argument extended. So I want to hope that His Holiness Pope Francis recovers quickly. I want to thank the eminences, Cardinal Turkson, Excellencies, members of the Diplomatic Corps, your honors, academicians, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, and my neighbor, Professor Orozco, who is my neighbor in Boston and who is a very close friend. Reading the Holy Father's encyclicals, Laudato Si and Fratelli Tutti, has been a wholly inspiring experience. What stands out for me is the spiritual idea of home that provides both encyclicals with an ethical and historical foundation upon which His Holiness constructs an edifice of temporal advice and historical instruction. Home is the place, as we know, of nativity. In the words of Isaiah, for to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, Isaiah 9. Nativity, in its turn, inspires a secular awakening of natality, an imminent renewal of historical faith in and hope for the world, in Hannah Arendt's words. The combination of these two ideas of nativity and natality, as I read them in the encyclicals, the one spiritual and the other material, is indeed also the source for Hannah Arendt's groundbreaking meditation, The Human Condition. Home, then, is the bridge between the nativity of human ecology, so much stressed in Laudato Si, and the nativity of human ontology, of the being of the human person, the reconstruction of ontology, which is very much the subject of Fratelli Tutti. To care for the world in which we live means, His Holiness says, to care for ourselves. And he proposes, for in the process, and I'm quoting him, we come to experience others as our own flesh. This brilliant drawing together of the ecological and the ontological I find extremely important. Our pastoral plan, our pastoral care for the planet is an intimate accommodation to the externality of nature, now brought to the internality, the interior of the human corpus. Reciprocally, the lived experience of others, the poor, the peripheral, the homeless, the displaced, comes then to be incorporated into our own flesh, as he puts it. And both forms of embodiment make them and us, and this I think is an extraordinarily important idea, agents in our mutual redemption, which is the aim of Fratelli Tutti. Human agency, understood as incorporating the planet and forms of otherness in our flesh, is constituted as a form of alterity. Otherness is inserted in my oneness. It is not outside of me, it is within me, and therefore creates the identification of empathy, sympathy, and duty. Human ecology and human ontology unite in the encyclicals to reflect on the ethics and politics of globalization, migration and climate change, and world poverty. Their significance for our second phase of decolonization now, in a post-colonial world of disappointed hope, as Adorno would put it, is made all the more urgent by the lineup of global ethno-nationalist leaders who dominate our imperiled, even imperialistic, uncommon world. These are politicians of miasma, not politicians of charisma. The fog of war that emanates from their rhetoric of disrespect, domination, and discrimination is couched in the language very often of unfounded allegations. But once these are unprovable, but once they are spoken, they are unremovable. You can't do anything about them. You have allegation after allegation. The illicit blind anger where there should be understanding, and antipathy where there should be empathy. It is by looking into this heart of darkness that the encyclicals ask the pointed decolonizing question. And I quote, "Nowadays, what do certain words like democracy, freedom, justice, or unity really mean? They have been bent and shaped to serve as tools for domination, as meaningless tags that can be used to justify any action." And these are words of His Holiness from Fratelli Tutti. It is the bending and breaking of these norms of moral life and political philosophy that I want to explore as a mode of negative politics, anterior to the construction of normative politics. It is by following the negative way, at no matter what the psychic or social risk, James Baldwin suggests that the white and black Americans will achieve unconditional freedom. And it is my great pleasure and honor this morning to sit beside Enrique Dussel, who has been a pioneer in thinking of the negative politics, negative ethics. He says, against the classic ontology of the center from Hegel to Marx, a philosophy of liberation is rising from the periphery, from the oppressed. And this is the important point. Our thought sets out from non-being, nothingness, otherness, exteriority, the mystery of no sense. I want to suggest that close encounters with notions of human dying and social death, being and nothingness, are testing grounds for achieving moral ontology of personhood in a decolonizing perspective. The most profound religious and philosophical texts, I believe, make us contemplate the void before we receive the vessel. Death in this figurative and spiritual sense is an ironic tenacity of survival. This side-by-side proximity of death-life is deeply embedded in our current decolonizing discourse, in the current situation we have of world injustice. How is it that we can simultaneously understand death as extinction and death as survival and the extension of life? Let us hear these voices of death life in real time before I explore my two related themes, the tyranny of global time and the enemy of allegations against the poor, against those who are a people of color, against refugees. Guides, a Syrian refugee who describes himself as a being who is already dead, says he will make the perilous Mediterranean crossing because that means that he has a 1% chance of leading an actual life. Roy Scranton, Iraqi vet and American climate change author, considers it crucial, he says, to cultivate daily reminders of mortality to spur the collective agency of climate change activism. Ta-Nehisi Coates, one of the most leading black intellectuals today in America, says he feels himself to be among the survivors of some great national and disastrous plague. How is it, he asks, in the current racial context, that I did not die in my aimless youth? And finally, to take us back to the 18th century, Daniel Defoe, author of the Diary of the Plague Year, writes of his experience of the pandemic, which is so closely echoes our own and echoes the moral tenor of Fratelli Tutti. Namely, he wrote in 1772 that whereas death now began not, as we may say, to hover over everybody's head only, but to look into their homes and chambers and stare in their eyes. His experience of the pandemic. The encyclicals themselves offer us an oblique approach to the paradox of what I have called extinction as extension by way of the question of temporality. To achieve moral and political transformation, what His Holiness has called love, justice, and solidarity in a process of decolonization, at a time, he says, when our common home has been hurt and mistreated as never before, he demands that we should have a profound transvaluation of global time, not merely a revision of history. Time, the very material of our lives, the very material of our speech and thinking, that's what has to be changed. It's a very complicated idea, but one in which I believe. Globalization has accelerated the growth dynamic of sectoral profitability, selective connectivity, and algorithmic advance, to the extent that asymmetries in opportunity and equality are now, in a temporal form, seen as anachronistic problems of the world, parts of the world that resist to come up to speed with globalization's glittering prizes. I think this is very important, the way in which time, not only space, but time has become a language of authority, and acceleration has become a form of authoritarianism. This is perniciously prevalent in both the North and the South, and creates schizoid, bipolar tensions within countries and across cultures. Peripheral peoples who populate cheap markets and marginal workers who accept low wages are the very subjects worn down by the burdened life of global ascendance. 2 decades ago, in 2002, the economist Joseph Stiglitz warned that the neocolonial implications of the IMF and free market fundamentalisms, combined with the struggle for superpower sovereignties, in their wake, we would now have a whole form of other rashes on the body politic of fundamentalism, religious fundamentalism, populist fundamentalism, ethno-nationalist fundamentalism. Decolonization as a body of thought and action takes its cue from the lives and times of those exiled from global acceleration and development. Those who are phenomenologically always seem to be belated or politically de-developed. I prefer de-developed to underdeveloped. Marginal and minoritized people are part of a cruel paradox of global dominance. They're kept in a state of arrested development by foreign bodies, or in India, where I come from, by their own governments, if you happen to be a Dalit or an untouchable. But they're put to work as the motors of global development. National minorities are frequently undocumented, and their invisibility as domestic help or anonymity in daily wage work gangs is struck from the public record of democratic progress and probity. It is minorities on a global scale that pay the price of the hollow promises of ethno-nationalist globalization. Make America great again. Make India Hindu again. Make Britain English again. Make China Uyghur free. Make Russia imperial again. The traditional tendency is to actually take issue with the adjective great. I take issue with the adverb again. Again and again and again, this adverb is an effective plea to barbaric nationalism. And it is what Freud would call a screen memory. It is not that it is inaccurate, but it becomes a way of substituting the current forms of power and repressing groups, and a number of motives with no concern for historical accuracy. And as we now know today, in many of these countries, you cannot talk about historical accuracy because half the media, more than half the media, is anyway not able to function. In the year ending September 2018, over 75% of the 100,000 asylum seekers from Central and South America were able to convince officials, and I quote from the New York Times, of their well-founded fear of persecution, the litmus test of the Refugee Convention 1951. As the New York Times reported, migrants at the US-Mexico border learned how to make legal asylum claims just as the law allows them to do. The Trump administration vowed to radically reduce the rate by making standards tougher. And in the words of Fratelli Tutti, which came to my attention again, it bent and shaped the law to serve as tools for domination, as meaningless tags that can be used, as the Holy Father put it, to justify any action. To justify this action, the Trump administration unconstitutionally put in place meaningless tags, again the words of the Holy Father, to interpellate South and Central Americans as illegals, rapists, gang members, and drug mules. At stake here is not only a political, legal, or policy issue, nor is it merely the construction of stereotypes. This issue goes beyond identity politics to questions of ontology, of the being of a whole community, the being of a whole continent. And this is an ontology of criminality or carcerality. This is not about individuals. This whole group is actually carceral. This whole group who want to come in legally, they are actually criminal. And that's a very important thing. It's not about stereotypes. Racism fixes these people like images in a police identification lineup for the purposes of repression and replacement with no concern for historical accuracy. Allegation attached to skin color, allegations exploiting inequalities of caste and class. Is this my, I have 3 minutes more? Yes. Okay. 3 minutes more. Allegations against religious and political affiliations, allegations of conspiracy. From a decolonizing perspective, I think one of the most harmful things now is that we have a double face of discrimination. We think about discrimination as something that we can legally get rid of, that if we have the right legal instruments, we can do it. We can somehow improve the lot of those who are discriminated against. But now we have a new kind of enemy of allegation, and it's a form of dehumanization. And dehumanization, you cannot simply think will disappear, because discrimination, the center of it is guilt. You appear in a court and people say you're not guilty. But the center of the new politics of ethno-national humanization is shame. And shame is very difficult to get rid of. Before I'm asked to stop, let me formally ask to stop. Let me just informally end with a poem that takes us back, a short lyric that takes us back to the great idea of home in Fratelli Tutti. And this comes from Toni Morrison. It's a lyric from her, a great lyric by her, which says, "Whose house is this? Whose night keeps out the light in here? Say, who owns this house? It is not mine. I had another, sweeter, brighter. This house is strange. Its shadows lie. However, tell me, why does its lock fit my key? However burdened you are, the whole nature of hope is to understand this house has made me into a slave. This nation has caused discrimination. But I cannot run. The key fits the lock. And there, dear friends, in my view, lies hope and home in a human key, both the key of the voice, but also the key of the door." Thank you.